Hello there, my name's Vince, I'm a composer, and on this channel you'll generally find me either composing music, performing, or just talking about the business of being a composer for a living, writing music every day. In this video I wanted to share a few reflections on the topic of writing for virtual instruments as a composer in the modern day, and what that means as opposed to writing for real players, and how superficially quite similar processes can serve quite different ends. So that sounds a little abstract. Let me kind of try and go into it, and hopefully you'll get a sense of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So as far as I can tell, there are basically two main ways of thinking about using virtual instruments as a composer in the modern day. The first is to think about them as essentially a kind of compromised way of demoing music that really is intended for live players, to translate something of what's in your head to a director or whoever you're working with. In the second way of thinking about it, virtual instruments are the primary means of expressing and communicating your idea. So you're writing very much in collaboration with what the samples have to offer. We can think of the DAW as the canvas and the virtual instruments as the paints. We know from the beginning of the creative process that we're writing for samples, not for live players. So generally speaking, my own personal music career has been built on the second approach, where virtual instruments are my artistic medium, and I've spent my time figuring out how best to be expressive through that medium. The sound, the performance of those sounds, the interpretation, the sort of micro timings, the tone sculpting that's possible with effects, and just the general mixing aspect, all of those things are things that I've been working on as an individual so that they can kind of flow together as a single creative process, and that's the thing that I have to offer to a listener or to a client. In other words, the final piece is a very particular expression of my individual tastes and my sort of musical identity. And real instruments, where they play a role, are generally thought of in more of a enhancement kind of role. So the analogy I like to use is that of seasoning in cooking. So, a relatively small thing that comes in at the end of the process that can actually have the potential to elevate the whole and take everything to a new level. But nobody's pretending that you can't just have the seasoning on its own, like the substance of the meal is the meat and the potatoes. But the seasoning is super, super important, even though it's like a relatively small part. And so that's kind of the role that real instruments have traditionally played in my own work. By contrast, another way of working is possible using the same set of tools, but just with a mindset that's more dictated by the first way of thinking about things, i.e. writing for live players, and all this technology kind of in service of that goal. So in this kind of way of thinking, the score is really the final piece that I have to deliver. So everything that I'm doing needs to sort of lead up to producing a score and possibly a demo, but the demo becomes less important because it's just a reference, or it's just something to convey a general sense of what we're aiming at. But there's a very clear understanding that the demo track isn't the final track. There's an element of letting go of the music at some point and allowing the players to kind of engage imaginatively and do their thing. And then just returning to this concept of seasoning, in this instance, it's kind of the other way round, where the meat and potatoes are going to be, if you'll forgive the expression, are going to be the real players. So in this case, some of the seasoning might come from the production style, any effects that are used, possibly the use of some samples or some synthesizers or whatever to kind of just support and enhance and enrich the sound a little bit. But the focus is very much on the players' individual interpretations, what they're bringing to it. And just as in the previous example, the seasoning, again, can play a relatively small role towards the end of the process, but can really elevate the whole. So where I'm at on my own journey, I'm definitely getting more and more interested in this more collaborative way of working. I'm definitely a DAW native kind of composer. My use of Logic and samples and stuff is the thing that I've been training myself at for the last decade or so. I think part of what's calling me forward with the live instruments thing and working more with real players and being a bit more collaborative in my workflow is not so much just some sense that it's it's better or it's truer in some abstract kind of concrete way. But it's more just an excitement because of the recognition that so much of the music that I love and I enjoy is kind of made that way. And also an excitement at the fact that a lot of what I've picked up and learned and all of the things that kind of have brought me to where I am are also very applicable in the goal of perhaps writing more for real players, and particular tools and technologies that are just coming out and things that I've already been exploring as well. So here are some speculations on how, for me as a DAW native and as an improviser, software can be put in the service of this goal of writing for live players a bit more. So for me personally, physical modeling instruments play quite a big role. You might have seen me on previous videos using this device, which is a breath controller, which also has bite sensitivity. And I have a keyboard down here just below the camera with a mod wheel and various faders, and it's got aftertouch. And all of these things allow me to, with practice, capture quite a lot of detailed information about a particular musical intention that I might have. The thing with physical modeling instruments is that there's no key switching, generally speaking. You're just kind of playing things in long notes, short notes, combinations of notes, more or less as you hear them in your head. The sort of arrival of these physical modeled or hybrid types of instruments on the sample scene has really been a massive upgrade in terms of the ability to just quickly plonk down an idea in a very seamless way. So again, thinking quite speculatively about how I might compose in the future, I can see myself using these physical modeling instruments in combination with maybe just piano sketching, maybe textual notes along the timeline, notes about my ideas in the notes panel in Logic, maybe color coding things, or maybe also using just my voice. Sort of just anything and everything to sort of just quickly blast the ideas down into a form where they're sort of a bit more concretized and I can refine them at a later stage. Then after that initial kind of messy stage of just jotting down ideas, it's going to be a case of refining those ideas in notation software. And so again, the use of physical modeling instruments is really helpful in this regard because you can have all of the performance data on a single track, and that track can be tidied up a little bit. The MIDI can be just quantized or whatever you need to do, and that can be brought directly into notation software in quite an easy way. You might have seen on a previous video, there are ways of having your MIDI piano roll on one side and then just selectively copying parts over to the notational score. So that's a really great way to take something like a string pad that I've just plonked in on the keyboard and start to orchestrate it, and for that process of carrying across to notation software to be as smooth as possible and as unintimidating as possible. And then in this refining stage, I've been really blown away just recently by looking a bit more in detail at what notational software can do nowadays. I've always been quite a kind of casual user of things like Sibelius, but actually just having slightly gotten beneath the surface of what's possible and seeing some of the more advanced features, especially in software like Dorico, which has quite an innovative approach to a lot of the more basic tasks and also some quite creative ways of inputting notes. I think all of that is very promising when it comes to thinking of the score as the final thing that you're creating, as the thing that's going to be communicating to the players. As opposed to thinking of the mock-up or thinking of the thing that you're hearing with your ears as the final thing. And then the final stage where software is likely to be involved is going to be creating a demo or a mock-up. And again, just thinking a bit speculatively here, I could see that the kind of playback just out of notation software using things like Note Performer is already very good and probably in some cases adequate. But also the kind of tighter integration between notation and DAW type tools is also very promising in terms of being able to produce mock-ups with a minimum amount of effort based on the notation. The idea that in the future I may be able to just hit a button and generate a mock-up using AI very easily that sounds pretty good is quite kind of relaxing in a way because as much as I enjoy the craft of creating mock-ups as a DAW creative, as somebody creating with samples as the final product. If I'm writing for live players and I just need a demo, I think there's really a strong role for automated AI type processes to take over at that point. And yeah, I for one am going to really welcome that. It just would allow me to sort of stay focused on the goal of working on that score and working on the ideas and working on the quality of the material, really focusing my energies there rather than on how do I get this like string line to do all of the articulations I need it to and still sound smooth and not be jarring to the listener. For the time being, I've been quite interested in refining my own workflow of getting music out of notation software back into the DAW for the mock-up. But there's something very clarifying about treating the mock-up as a separate stage. It's not part of the compositional process. You're not sort of speculatively hunting around for cool sounds that are going to make it sound really, epic or whatever. You've already established the musical intention in the score, so it's just a case of using whatever tools you have, whatever samples you have to kind of convey that. And it's really if it sounds good, it is good kind of thing at that point. You're not too worried about making a complete mess with the MIDI. It's just quite nice. It really frees up a lot of mental clutter rather than thinking that it's still part of the compositional process. And so I might just tweak this and tweak that. And maybe what if it went over here? So that's it. Quite a simple video this week, I'm afraid. Nothing too fancy editing wise. But I did want to just kind of jot a few thoughts down sort of as a bit of a journal to myself. And yeah, I hope some of this was relevant to you. Let me know what you think in the comments about the whole writing to samples thing. I know it can be a bit of a contentious topic, but yeah, I hope that the main thing that comes across from this is that both ways of thinking about virtual instruments are totally valid, of course, and I'm personally excited as somebody who's built a career on sort of really writing to samples, really, to sort of experiment with this other way of like writing a bit more for the real instruments and then using the production and all the technology and samples to just enhance that. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And yeah, good luck with all of your own creative projects. And thank you for all of your attention. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks very much.